Hello my dear friends, this is Phil again and welcome back to my channel. So first of all, Happy New Year to every one of you, and I hope you had a lovely and relaxed break during the Christmas and the New Year holiday. I have to say I've been lazy during this whole holiday period, and I really enjoy my time together with my family, with my kids. And now I think I'm ready and recharged to bring more better video to you, to the Fallout 76 community. So in today's episode, I'd like to talk about what kind of weapon is better and why they are better inside the game. And to actually answer this question, we need to start from the basics. How exactly the damage has been calculated inside the game. That question by itself is already a huge topic. Trust me, there are too many differentiations or variations of how the damage is calculated based on the scenario, based on what weapon you use, what mode you use on the weapon, and how your build is. But let's only talk about the basics because those basic things are the true determinative factor which actually affect how a weapon is performing inside the game. So how exactly the damage has been calculated in Fallout 76? Let's start with the most basic elements in the formula, your base damage, which is basically the base physical damage coming together with any weapon you are using. You can find them easily in your Pip-Boy if you don't have any perks equipped. And on top of the base damage, you will get a lot of different damage bonuses, which is additive. That means they added directly to the base damage. And you can get this additive damage from a lot of different factors, including perks, camps, food, drink, legendary effects from any weapon, and critical damage as well. But that's not the end of the story. So put the base damage and the additive damage together, you have the multiplicative damage bonus as well, which means it gives you a multiplier which can be applied to the overall damage, including your base damage as well as all of your additive damage. So this multiplier is very powerful elements in the full calculation of the damage. But again, that's not the end of the story. Beyond that, you can also count the critical damage into the full damage you can produce. You actually have your base damage, have your additive damage with your multiplier, then you have a critical damage, which is I believe 50% of your base damage. Now with all of this damage together, you have your outgoing, or for the enemies, it's incoming damage. This whole incoming damage is packed up in the one single bullet which left your weapon every time you pull the trigger. If you successfully hit your target, then this bullet needs to actually pass through the armor or the resistance of the mob to bring the received damage to the hit target. So for the ballistic damage, which means, for example, all the guns using conventional ammo, basically a physical bullet. It uses this formula to calculate the received damage, where the resistance of the mob of the target play a very important role. But for all the other type of damage, for example, the energy damage or the elemental damage, which exists currently in the game actually uses a slightly different formula to calculate the received damage. And the main difference is this factor here, now it's base damage instead of the incoming damage. If we look at this picture here, the base damage is just a small part of your overall incoming damage. That means for all the energy and the elemental weapons, even they have the same base damage, they share the same additive damage bonus as well as the multiplier, they're gonna cause much less damage when they hit the target. And with all of this information in mind, we can easily have two conclusions, which can be helpful for any one of you who's playing the game to find the right weapon you should use. Clearly, because the resistance exists, the higher power weapon, which means the weapon with high damage per shot, will be superior against those with lower damage per shot weapons, because the resistance can have much more impact to those bullets with smaller or lower damage. And I will show you a diagram very soon after this to explain why the high power weapon is more efficient against any resistance. And the second conclusion, which is also very important, is the ballistic weapon, they are much more superior than those energy counterparts, which is very straightforward as I explained, because the calculation formula is different and all the energy and elemental weapon is actually suffering these base damage elements in the equation instead of the incoming damage for ballistic damage, which is much higher than the base damage. Now let me show you a diagram which can explain clearly why the high power weapons are much more efficient against any armor or resistance. So in this diagram, what I'm trying to show you is the weapon efficiency against various resistance. On the y-axis, that's the received damage against the incoming damage ratio. So the higher the percentage is, means the more efficient the bullet is actually causing damage to the target. And the horizontal axis is the incoming damage. So actually it's spread from 10 to 330. And the three lines in this diagram corresponds to different resistance. So for example, the blue line shows you how efficient or how effectively your bullet is damaging the target when the target have a resistance of 150. And the orange line shows you the weapon efficiency against a mob with resistance of 200. This diagram only shows you ballistic example. And the green line apparently means the same weapon with the same damage against a mob with a resistance of 300, which basically means one of the endgame bosses. So the first thing we can see here is when the incoming damage increases, the efficiency of the weapon increases. So the higher the damage of a single bullet from your weapon, the more efficient it's against any mobs with higher resistance. And we all know at the end of the game, most of the mobs have very high resistance, and you would want to use a high-powered weapon to improve your efficiency. Let's take the heavy weapon example. Between a minigun and a Gatling gun, I would surely go for the Gatling gun because the Gatling gun is much more powerful per bullet per shot. It will be much more efficient to kill the mobs. Another example is the Gatling laser and the Gatling plasma. And the Gatling plasma have a much higher damage per shot than the Gatling laser. And that means you should definitely go for the Gatling plasma instead of the Gatling laser, because the Gatling laser is much more efficient against the tough enemies, with apparently the same damage bonuses and same legendary effects. So that's everything I want to discuss with you today. The two conclusions I want to emphasize here is you want to always use a high power weapon to improve your weapon efficiency against tougher enemies. You will always want to choose a ballistic weapon or a conventional weapon over energy or elemental weapons when they have similar damage per shot and similar fire rate. For example, I would definitely go for a handmade over a laser rifle. Those two conclusions, they are for general scenarios, and there are some specific scenarios those two or one of those conclusions may not work. But we're actually running out of time in this video. I'm not going through every single specific conditions with you here. If you are interested in, leave your comments down below. We can definitely discuss all of these specific conditions or scenarios in the comment area. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this video and found some information which is useful and helpful during your gameplay. Please give me a thumb up and subscribe to my channel. But until next time, Phil Legends out.